back to Posting Through It. I'm Jared.
I'm Mike.
Some Patreon shout-outs off the top. Sorry, we fell a little behind on these. In the Executive Club, we've got Sean Donahue. Thanks so much for supporting the show at an elevated level. The Platinum tier, we've got Jeffrey Kays. Thank you so much. Our listener music on this week's episode comes to us from a band called Girthworm. G-U-R-T-H Worm. The song is called Gray Beard. This is a band out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Kind of heavier.
Lovely city.
I love the riffs on this track. We'll put a link to it in the description if you want to go check it out. So next week is going to mark the end of primary season in the United States, meaning we'll know who is facing off against who in this year's midterm elections. Over the next few months, we expect to see the nation's focus turn once again to the ballot box as Democrats make a run at gaining enough seats in Congress to attain a majority in the Senate, in the House, or, if you're really optimistic, both.
So the GOP is getting nervous about losing their hold over the federal government, which is pretty total as of right now. Among other things, they're concerned about potential impeachment, that sort of thing, or certainly one person is concerned about that. And Trump is the face of their party, and his approval numbers are, Jared, really bad, as we've covered at various times during this 2026 year of Posting Through It. And there's no sense of that it's going to improve anytime soon.
So the conservative movement has fantasized about tweaking election processes in ways that would make it more difficult to vote as long as I can remember. But that really reached a fever pitch after Trump lost the 2020 election to Joe Biden. In our last premium episode, we looked back at 2000 Mules, which was Dinesh D'Souza's 2022 film that was created to try to validate the frenzy and, frankly, just disbelief that Trump supporters had after Joe Biden won the 2020 election. And we talked about how that film has, kind of transformed the way that the Republican Party talked about elections.
If you go back and listen to that premium episode, or if you've already listened to it, you will know that 2000 Mules, all of a sudden he's like, bam. And then they're like 52,000 more mules show up, which was my favorite part of it. In the years after the 2020 election, especially after January 6th, the nation heard a lot about these kinds of conspiracy theories, and we think they're going to come back. You often saw news stories about election deniers. These things have not gone away. And the beat that would cover this sort of thing, there seemed to be like a lot of infrastructure built up to cover election deny. That's kind of disappeared, but the movement itself has not gone away. And meanwhile, the federal government and also local governments, very local, are filled with people who believe the 2020 election was a rigged election.
On July 16th, you may have seen headlines about Trump giving a 25-minute address from the White House, repeating his claims that 2020 elections were corrupt and claiming this time that the Chinese government may have had something to do with it.
But it gets even worse. Raw intelligence obtained by the FBI in 2020, yet buried by rogue bureaucrats, stated that China's activities even included an attempt to manufacture illegal ballots for Joe Biden.
He has released troves of documents, none of which have really proved his claims, none of which have proved a single vote in 2020 was improper. But it represents, I think, really clearly the continued influence of this election denialist movement and the way that the Trump administration and today's Republican Party have really sought to embolden it. Mike and I have been talking about how we want to cover midterm elections, and we are expecting things to get really chaotic, especially if the polling we're seeing today seems to hold and Republicans get hosed at the ballot box. It could get pretty ugly. So we've got a couple people joining us today who know a hell of a lot about the election denialist movement, who have not taken their eye off the ball, and we're going to talk about what you need to know. Joining Posting Through It now, we've got Alex Kaplan and Kayla Gogarty. Alex is a senior researcher at Media Matters. Kayla is a research director, and they've spent a lot of time tracking the election denialist movement.
The movement that doesn't sleep also.
I feel like we used to hear about election denialism a lot more than we do today. I don't know if this is just because journalism in general is shrinking as an industry, or if this beat just isn't what it used to be at major publications. But what is the state of election denialism right now? Because I think you could almost be forgiven for, your run-of-the-mill New York Times reader for thinking maybe this stuff is kind of waned off. But is that actually the case?
I think it's kind of the center of gravity switched a bit. After 2020, Trump wasn't in office anymore for those 4 years when Biden was president. And a lot of the election denial activity was on the states. There was even I can get more into it, but there was a Secretary of State candidates coalition involving some election deniers that was trying to win in the 2022 midterms in order to control election processes, like in 2024. But Trump still was reelected in 2024. And I think because of that, a lot of the focus has gone back to Trump because he's president again. And the feeling is that he's the one that can make these changes or try to force, elections to be unrigged, quote unquote. And so I think that's been kind of a change.
When you say this has been playing out on the state level, I know I've seen stories out of places like Arizona and Pennsylvania, these being, swing states that can be quite critical in determining the control of federal power. But how widespread has it been? Has it been kind of targeted on these states, or have you seen this play out nationwide?
I saw a particular focus on the states, the swing states that Biden won. So like Pennsylvania, Arizona,
Nevada.
States that there presumably will be a focus in 2028 too.
Yes.
You mentioned the Secretary of State's council. What other changes are they seeking? What other kind of activism are they doing on the state level?
One thing that they tried to do is a lot of election analysts had tried to get Eric kicked out of their states. They claimed it didn't help with the voter rolls, even though it actually probably did. Some counties, getting even more local, have tried to do things like do only hand counts instead of using machines because they think that'll create a better, more accurate count. Although I believe studies have shown that that's not true. In California, recently, there was a sheriff who tried to confiscate ballots to check for fraud in one election. That I think that was stopped in court. But those are some things that have been going on.
It sort of feels to me when I hear that, like they tried to raw dog this overturning of the election in 2020 without any kind of infrastructure in place. And they've been slowly putting in pieces all the while, but we've become so inured, I guess, to the fact that they want to do this that it's no longer being treated as a story. Is that kind of what it was? It's just hey, we want to just ram our perceived result through without actually counting votes. But wait a second, we have actual professionals who are doing the job, but we're going to try to flip that. And now everyone's just yeah, that's what they want to do. That seems like a pretty scary combination.
Yeah, I would also say that they, following the 2020 election, they really did try to build up a local infrastructure. So we saw a lot of state organizations, like Cleta Mitchell, for instance, was involved in a network. And then they used those networks to also then leverage right-wing media, far-right media, where, they would go on these shows. They would still push conspiracy theories about the 2020 election, conspiracy theories. So they really tried to build out that infrastructure and then also leverage the media infrastructure that was already in place that they could use.
Some of these claims are not even new. A major, I guess I'll call it election denial war at this point. A major part of the lore is this conspiracy, and we can get more into it, is this conspiracy theory that like half the world essentially was involved in some way in interfering or hacking the United States elections, but particularly China and Venezuela. And that claim about like Venezuela was not new. I believe like Sidney Powell was pushing it like right after the 2020 election, but it's become more built out, let's say. It's become more solidified. There's become more people that have built on it in a way, tried to give more details. So yeah, like it's not, it wasn't even new. It's just like, so some of the stuff is just kind of like Kayla said, it's become kind of more built out through like the right-wing infrastructure, the right-wing media apparatus.
The Venezuela stuff is so insulting to the audience, but they don't care. I had to look up, it's apparently called SEBIN, is the Venezuelan intelligence service. It's like, when have you ever heard, the notorious SEBIN overturning the United States elections, the entire, like, the hundreds of millions of votes that they have to flip over. They're like, yeah, we can do that. We're the Venezuelan intelligence service, SEBIN.
Yeah. You watch right-wing media, you hear all this stuff about, Mossad's doing this. Oh my, the MI5, they're spying, the Five Eyes countries are doing this, but the Venezuelan intelligence apparatus has its claws deep in the country. And I'm going to stop this bit now.
No, I mean, like, it's a lot. It honestly can be hard to track. It's like a gazillion countries, a gazillion people, a gazillion entities, and some of the figures in this like think it's like so obvious or something, and it's very hard unless you're like really into this lore. It is like almost incomprehensible.
It does feel a little bit like the lore is just there as a placeholder to just do the thing that they all unconsciously want to do. It's like giving a euphemism for sex. We're going to go do some euphemism or whatever for sex or something like that. You say that instead of like the blunt thing, right? So they're like, yeah, I mean, like, don't worry about it. I mean, this country is currently, like, Marco Rubio is running it through a PlayStation controller, but definitely their intelligence service is doing that. Like, it's just sort of a euphemism for like, yeah, we're gonna get the candidates in that we want.
Yeah, the conspiracy theory, the actual specifics of it doesn't really matter. It is a placeholder. They just want to leverage that so that they can lay the groundwork to make changes, at state and federal level. Now that Trump is, in office, they have access to the levers of power and can make some of these, broader policies. And that's what we're seeing them try to do at this point. They are trying to kind of use those conspiracy theories to push for policies that they want. One of which, the Save America Act, election deniers are all on board with that and are trying to push it. We've obviously also have seen several election deniers and right-wing media figures start calling for Trump to declare a national emergency ahead of the midterms. And we can talk more about that, of course, because I think that's particularly notable. But overall, they're able to take those conspiracy theories and just leverage them for whatever policies that they're seeking.
Yeah, we'll talk about some of the things that they're calling for justified with these conspiracy theories. But a question I have for you, Kayla, is, as a research director at a nonprofit that spends a whole lot of time tracking right-wing media, including these folks, I think what Alex was getting at just a moment ago was that these conspiracy theories are basically lore at this point, right? And they have, a lot of them may have entered the popular consciousness, or at least the MAGA popular consciousness, after the 2020 election. But for 5 years now, at least, they've been developing, right? It's getting more and more complicated. We're at the point in the Netflix series where it's like season 7, or have you ever seen the show Weeds? It's like the first season is about, a suburban mom who starts, selling weed to support her family or whatever. And then by like the 4th season, it's just a
Telenovela.
Thank you, Mike.
Yes.
It's like a soap opera that has nothing to do with anything. And I feel like a lot of the conspiracy theories about elections are we're on season 8 now. And I have a hard time following the plot. But as a research director at a nonprofit whose job is to follow the plot, when you're talking to people or publishing pieces or thinking about like what to cover and what not to cover, how important is it to understand the development of these plots, right? Like, as from a research perspective, do you feel like you need to keep up to date with that week's episode all the time? Or do you ever feel like, the specifics of a claim of how the Venezuelan equivalent of the MI6 and James Bond, hacked a single Smartmatic voting machine in Dayton, Ohio, and that's why Joe Biden won? Like, at what point is that? Like, how important is it for people to understand the specifics of these claims? And have your thoughts changed on that as time's gone on and these conspiracy theories have gotten more and more intricate?
They're definitely hard to unravel sometimes, but we often try to unravel them so that we have a sense of where they're coming from, who is spreading them, and why they're spreading them, because could be bigger implications. I think, I've been at Media Matters for, almost 8 years now. Over time, we kind of have developed like an internal bar I've developed where what bar does a conspiracy theory, reach where we need to warn people about it? And some of those criteria is like, how far outside of far right, media is it? Has it gotten to some of the right wing media figures? Has it gotten to Fox, cable? Like, what audiences is it getting to? That's part of, how we assess. And then also, how tied in is that figure who's pushing the conspiracy theory to, people in power? And I think that's one of the reasons why what's happening now is particularly concerning, because they do have access to the levers of power. And, we saw Trump give this address and, push some of those conspiracy theories. And so it broke containment and it made it all the way to him. And now they're trying to use it for certain policies that they are looking for. And I think all of it is really to lay the groundwork for undermining the upcoming midterms and then, eventually 2028.
Can I ask a question that I'm not asking you to make sense of their brains. Like, I know sometimes that could be very challenging.
I'm asking that, by the way.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is do your best. But Trump won handily in 2024, and nobody really questioned on the left. Were like, this must have been rigged, or anything. Everybody was like, yep, that probably happened, based upon the fact that Joe Biden completely shit the bed in June or whatever it was. Where was it? Was it June that it happened? It was so close. I think, when she had like 100-day run, it's like, of course, like looking back, like, yeah, probably that makes sense. And then they didn't question it. They were like, yes, Trump kicked your ass, right? How does that actually work? All of a sudden, we're supposed to say like, what, the election was fair because Trump won, and then not. I don't understand how you can persist with this. Why not just say we shouldn't have elections anymore, and that we should have some sort of dictator from the right be in power all the time? Like, why bother with the elections at all and the stories? Because that particular election doesn't get any attention.
So to be clear, you're asking why was 2020 rigged, but in 2022, but not 2020, but 2024 was fine, but now we're worried it's going to be rigged again.
Yes.
Okay. There isn't more a reason for this, and it's actually kind of crazy, at least among certain election deniers, the major players. Without getting into the specifics of it, again, involves the Venezuelan conspiracy theory, and a too long didn't read version of it essentially is that someone in the DOD hacked a Serbian election center or something, some type of building with computers for like multiple days. They melted the servers, and this prevented Harris from winning.
Let's fucking go, dude. Why not?
That is the lore. Like, Patrick Byrne, who's a major player in this, constantly talks about it. He's even said that he had a backup plan in order to do this, that he had hired an Albanian mafia that was going to firebomb a Serbian elections center computer place. But fortunately, DOD people got involved beforehand, so he didn't have to resort to that.
That was a little adventuresome time in all of our lives, but those last few weeks before the election of 2024, I did have a backup plan. I want you to know it all happened legally. And it was actually, I'm not supposed to say this, but I don't care. It was the U.S. Department of Defense Cyber Command who actually did it. who took out the Belgrade Serbia office, I had a backup plan. I had a deal with the Albanian mafia that were ready to firebomb the place for $1 million for me.
You probably should not say that on TV.
Well, I don't think they can arrest you for just planning it. But 5 days before the election day, I got word that no, DOD is going to take care of it. It was and it was all done in a way that the Biden administration didn't even know. So didn't even know what was going on. And it was the U.S. Cyber Command that smoked the place.
It sounds like something from an action movie.
But this would have been the DOD under the Biden administration.
Yeah, no. Apparently they were patriots or something inside, I guess, the DOD.
Yeah, Biden wasn't able to clear out all the patriots. These are a few patriots who had diarrhea on January 6th, so we're not able to be arrested by the Biden administration.
I guess it's so weird. Like some of this, I mean, you think about it, I'm like, this sounds like they think like they're in a movie. Like some action movie. Like I've like wondered, like, do they like watch a lot of like James Bond or something? And just like, but that's like kind of like the weird part of this lore. It's like as the more goes, it more becomes more and more complicated. It's become like more and more like it's just more and more like Hollywood-ish in a way, like in terms of like the way they're like scripting this.
Again, seems a lot like the story is just a placeholder for the mission, right? It's just like they're like, here's some stuff we can believe in that, but the subtext is we know what we're doing.
What they're doing is basically, hurting our trust in institutions. And that goes beyond just the right. So, going into 2026, you do see, more progressive liberals, starting to push conspiracy theories because their trust in these institutions have also declined as well. But in 2024, they also like to say that it was just too big to rig. Right-wing figures love to say that, but it's hypocritical. It's definitely hypocritical. Every election that goes in their favor, totally fine. Nothing was wrong. But if it doesn't go in their favor, obviously it was rigged. It was stolen. There's nefarious activity.
So I want to kind of break down the rest of our time here on sort of 2 points. We've established that this movement is still churning along. It is still having overlaps, contacts and impacts with people who hold high amounts of federal power in this country. The media ecosystem is still churning. So the first thing I want to tackle is, what do they specifically want to happen? And 2, how are they going to try to get it? Alex, you wrote a piece about election deniers who were calling for a national emergency declaration so Trump could, the quote in the headline is, give himself king-like powers over midterm elections. I've heard this kind of go back and forth that, maybe if Trump just declares some kind of national emergency, he'll get access to all kinds of new powers. Maybe that's how he can stop the quote unquote fraud. But can you tell me more about that, Alex? Like what are they asking for? What are they envisioning specifically here?
Really, since Trump took office or after that, there was a discussion among election deniers that Trump could declare some type of emergency for national security reasons that would essentially allow him to take control of election processes. And what that means is that he could somehow force election officials in the states and counties to do things like force voter ID, ban mail-in ballots, use the machines, hand count, and maybe even potentially, bring in the National Guard or some type of military to, oversee this happening. And this has been there's been kind of a drumbeat among deniers pushing for this, particularly since fall of 2025. I would also say, actually, as the SAVE Act, which has, some of the same goals.
Yeah, the SAVE Act is a national voter ID bill. A lot of Democrats will say, hey, we're not against the concept of this totally, but the requirements outlined in this bill are incredibly burdensome. And also the bill offers no additional funding to states to help enforce this. And at the same time, creates a legal liability for election officials who don't have a 100% perfect record on it. So it's gotten a lot of heat, but they have tried to get that through Congress, and it's becoming increasingly clear that's not going to happen before midterms.
Right. And more, I would say, election deniers figures have become, or have either joined or become more outspoken saying that, okay, well, it doesn't look like this thing's going to pass. Let's do a national emergency. It'll basically get what we want. Forget the SAVE Act.
And these policies, experts say that they could suppress votes. And I think that's part of what the strategy is around, the SAVE Act and this potential national emergency is they don't want potential Democratic voters to be able to go to the polls. We've seen some of them call for ICE to be at the polls, which could potentially turn away voters. We've also seen right-wing figures push, for the repeal of the 19th Amendment, which gave, women the right to vote. They want to suppress voters, and that's part of what some of these policies would do.
My concern about the ICE at polling places thing, which Steve Bannon announced earlier this year, is this, I worry that it's the type of thing that they could just do and ask permission for later, meaning it seems like that Miller, more important than Trump here, is the type of person who tries to ram something through and then will just sort it out in the courts later. That it's just, the strategy is just, it takes too long to figure this out, the slow way. Let's just do it and then we'll try to figure it out later and it's adjudicated and then whatever. In this case, the damage that it could do to the elections and perception of elections, if it's something that they do and it's deemed illegal later and then there are all these challenges, that would only work to their favor too, because it would just make the elections look broken, et cetera, right? We tried to do the thing to save the elections, whatever. So that's one that really, really concerns me. And then you mentioned the national emergency thing. I think this is one of the things, this is not exactly a scientific thought on my part, but I remember first hearing about the national emergency type things in the first Trump era, coming from liberals and scholars and stuff like that, talking about the things they could do. And it feels like that they were like, hey, actually we can do this. And now they're advocating it. Anyway, two separate thoughts there.
I think what's worth getting into about the national emergency is that it's not just some people on podcasts throwing the idea out there. Some of them are, but not.
They all have podcasts.
Yeah.
And so do we.
But or when they go on others. But the concern here is that some of these guys or some of these people have done more. They've worked together to propose a written down proposal for doing this that has actually gone around the Trump administration. And there's been actually a lot of people involved in this.
Yeah, the draft proposal also hinges on China and the conspiracy theory around that. So that's why I think we also see John Solomon now, in that task force that is trying to go through documents and release those, kind of cherry pick these documents that they think, kind of helps their conspiracy theory. And then they can use that to then, as a predicate, we have this evidence that China, interfered in 2020, so they might interfere again. We need these policies, we need this executive order. I think that's why I was so concerned ahead of Trump's address, was that we have also seen, Steve Bannon and talk about how, John Solomon and his task force can help, create that predicate for such a national emergency. Bannon has also pointed to Bill Pulte, who is, up until a few days ago, was acting director of national intelligence, where he had access to these documents as well. So, they like to take these little kernels of truth. Some of these documents exist, but then they try to make these widespread sweeping claims about how China interfered and changed the outcome of the election. And so, they're trying to create that predicate in a way so that they can, enforce or create this national emergency.
What I'm hearing is they got a trifecta control over the federal government, tried to do this the quote unquote proper way by trying to pass through some legislation, didn't get what they want. So now the idea is to cook up some kind of national security pretense so that maybe they can change how elections are conducted in this country under the sweeping permissions that a quote unquote national security crisis affords the executive branch. Is that right?
According to some of the people involved, they claim that Trump was dissuaded from issuing this proposal because he was told the SAVE Act would pass. And as the SAVE Act, again, has looked more and more unlikely to become law, The national emergency stuff's gaining traction. I would say even more. I mean, I think there are certain people who have bigger figures who have jumped on the national emergency train in recent months than I'd seen before. I would actually say Steve Bannon, for example. I don't think he was pushing the national emergency stuff until recent months. Another figure who's gone on Bannon's show also pushed for it. This guy named Wayne Allen Root. He's like a radio show podcast guy, another, conspiracy theorist guy. He's also been like a Trump ally. He's like spoken at Trump rallies.
He was one of the first like nationally syndicated radio hosts to get on the Trump train.
Mm-hmm.
I know way too much about Wayne Allen Root, more than anybody should, but like he's influential is what you're saying.
He's been writing for months, like columns in like the Gateway Pundit. He's like, Mr. President, you gotta do this national emergency, which apparently he claims that he made up, but only a few months ago. But again, as we've talked about,
there's no way that's true.
Yeah, he's claimed that like he's like messaged with Trump about doing this national emergency.
And you can't discount it. That's the other thing. You can't discount. All you have to really do is just worship Donald Trump to get access to Donald Trump. It's like, I'm fucking obsessed. I'm so obsessed with you. You're the great. Oh, I love you. And then the next thing you know, you got meetings with the guy.
Yeah. And some of the same people involved potentially with the proposal were behind maybe like Wayne Allen Root becoming a fan of this idea. So even though it's kind of different tacks, I guess, or different avenues for certain people towards embracing this national emergency call, a lot of this, it's kind of all this network has become a bit connected.
And there's also a lot of money flying around it too. So let's talk now about how they might try to get it as midterms roll up. We saw after the 2020 election a absolute monsoon of conspiracy theories, of, from everything from your random X account with 1,000 posts that's just like, Mr. President, please consider declaring a national emergency. Trust the plan. QAnon is real. To Fox News.
Also, I just want to clarify, there is no such thing as a random X account anymore, in the sense that like all the entire administration is on that app 24 hours a day. So anything could wind up right in their lap.
My point is like top to bottom, right? It's like you had from Fox News at the tip top spreading versions of these theories down to like weird corners of the far right. It just flooded the zone enough over years of time to the point where, you have nominees for the Trump administration going before Congress, and they seem absolutely terrified of just even saying out loud into a microphone that Joe Biden won the 2020 election, right? It went from being something that the Republican Party was like, sure, whatever, that's what our guy says, we'll play with this. Capitol riot happens, and they're like, I don't know. Was that a mistake? And then over the course of months and years came around to the point of like, well, no. That wasn't a mistake. We just didn't plan this out enough, right? So they've been planning this out, and they've been refining these messages, and these theories and talking points are getting slicker and more sophisticated. The networks of influencers and activists that they can activate with it are interconnected. They're funded. And I think a lot of people are rightfully a little bit anxious about what could happen in the midterms in 2026. The way polling is shaking out at the moment, it doesn't seem like the Republican Party has a whole lot of reasons for optimism. It's just not looking great. We've done prior episodes talking about the efforts to break convention and try to gerrymander House races and pick up some extra seats, the Senate races and sort of how they are trying to approach those. But I think now that primary season is just about over and these races come into clearer focus and things start picking up, a lot of people are wondering what kind of things we can expect to see, what kind of things we could anticipate if it looks like elections aren't going the Republican Party's way this time. Kayla, you wrote a piece about the LA mayoral primary where Spencer Pratt, a reality TV star, tried to run for mayor in Los Angeles. Didn't do well in the primary, even though MAGA kind of coalesced around him in the final couple of months of that campaign and tried to give him a boost. And we saw the James O'Keefes of the world influencers of the world, the Benny Johnsons, whatever, trying to draw into doubt the legitimacy of the LA mayoral election. The piece that you wrote kind of frames this up as a preview of what we might be able to expect in this year's midterms. Can you talk to me about what kind of playbook rolled out after that election, and what about it to you stuck out as, signs of like this is kind of a taste of what may be to come?
Yeah, so in March, months ahead of the primary election in LA, we saw, the James O'Keefes of the world. They like to call themselves independent journalists, where they go out and they try to create content and they try to ambush people and try to create this quote unquote evidence of whatever they're looking for. So we saw them all descend on LA, and they were going up to voter registration drives and trying to question people, on Skid Row who were trying to register to vote. We saw them ambush, some officials where they were trying to say that this is all proof that there is nefarious activity, that, people are being sold cigarettes in exchange for registering to vote, like those sorts of things. So they, created this content, make these claims. After the LA race, they were then leveraged to suggest that, or to say outright that the LA race had to have been rigged because, these instances happen.
They stole it right in front of our face and laughed at us the entire time. Look, Spencer Pratt is not MAGA. His content, his policies, and he's upfront about that. But he is a Trumpian candidate in wanting to take on and take down the established order. In that regard, I think a lot of people supported him. But they stole this election from him in broad daylight, and nobody put up a fight.
It is a playbook, I think, coming up. And I think, they might target poll workers. They might target election officials, where they, try to ambush them, try to make them say, inflammatory stuff, provoke them, and as a result, get this content that they can then, edit, even maybe deceptively, and then spread that content. And, notably, the administration is also trying to leverage this. So they can use it to kind of help their policy aims, or to, undermine the election if it doesn't go in their favor. So we saw this happen in LA, and it's a playbook for what could happen ahead of the midterms. These independent quote unquote journalists are getting traction in right-wing media. They're being amplified. They're using the footage to also make claims about voter fraud. So, after Spencer Pratt lost the race, we saw them playing the content again and using it to make these widespread claims of fraud. And the administration is definitely watching and looking out for it.
Can you elaborate on that a bit more? You say the administration has been looking at it. Do you mean like taking lessons from it, involved in it? Like, what do you mean by that exactly?
James O'Keefe actually handed off his footage to a prosecutor in the LA area who was a political appointee from the administration. And they actually, ended up charging somebody that had been on the video. But, it's another case of them, taking one instance and then making these hyperbolic claims. But the administration is looking out for this, and they are giving this quote unquote evidence directly to the administration. After the LA race, we did see them using that to call for, this is why we need the SAVE Act. We see that these instances of people are, this is nefarious activity. It's undermining the election. There's voter fraud. And so we need something like the SAVE Act. So it's a big feedback loop where it all kind of ties together with they're able to leverage this content and use it for their policy aims.
Yeah, we just rewatched 2000 Mules, and it's like, who could possibly believe this shit? And it's like, what if I told you it was the highest ranking people in the federal government? Anyway, are there any other things that either of you have seen playing out in recent months that may be able to, that you have seen that you've thought maybe were signals of the kind of messaging we may see from Republicans if midterms don't go the way that they're hoping they might?
There was another proposal that I thought was worth mentioning. It related to, I would say, the national emergency stuff that's been going around from one of the people who've actually has been calling for it. So I was going to mention Tina Peters.
Oh, yeah.
So Tina Peters is the former Mesa County, Colorado clerk who was like indicted for basically kind of like improper access to election material.
You're really underselling it, Alex. She cooked up a whole fake story to get a guy who claimed he was a super data guru hacker access to a ballot counting machine in her county to try to prove that it wasn't secure, and in the process completely jeopardized the security of her county's voting machines, requiring them to swoop in and replace all kinds of systems. Like, she was like, I'm going to prove that there's a real problem, and created the exact problem that she was alleging.
Yeah, so she went to jail for that, but there was a sustained pressure campaign by Trump to get her released because he did try to pardon her at one point, but the president is not supposedly able to pardon someone for a state crime at the federal level.
That's why the stakes were so high for him with his Georgia prosecution.
Yeah. So they did a sustained pressure campaign, and eventually Colorado's Democratic governor, Jared Polis, commuted her sentence. And in just I guess it's only been a couple of months since she was released, has been really active in election denial activity already. Like, yeah, she's been going around the podcast circuit. She had an Oval Office meeting with Trump, but even more than that, she has partnered with some other election denier figures to propose, like she called it I think a midterm election security strategy, something like that. And she claimed that she met with CISA, that DHS sub-agency.
Cyber Information Security, I believe is what it stands for.
Yeah, so that's hard to remember.
Not the singer, songwriter, R&B.
She said that she and a group of other election deniers, including one who was a special government employee under Trump, at least for a period of time, named Clay Peruk, that she, him, and a couple of other guys met with the acting director of CISA to propose, ways to have elections be supposed to be more secure, and then released this full plan that she then mailed to them, to supposedly, continue what they were talking about, that is supposed to incentivize election officials to kind of do what they want with a national emergency and or the SAVE Act in some aspects, encourage paper ballots or relying less on voting machines.
Full hand counts.
Yeah. And she voted using grant money from DHS as an incentive for election officials at the local level to do this. So that might be a more less, I don't want to say heavy-handed, but way of getting at what a national security or national emergency would do, which again, Tina Peters has essentially called for before she released this proposal. She didn't use the words national emergency, but she basically said, I want Trump to sign an executive order that's going to do this. So she basically was on board. So this seems to be kind of another proposal during all this that would do that. Just one more thing we're mentioning is that Tina Peters' lawyer is Peter Tickton, who is a friend of Trump and was one of the major people involved in crafting the proposal of the national security order that reached the administration report. So again, it's this interconnectedness of all these people.
Yeah, they're throwing a lot of things at the wall and, chasing these conspiracy theories. They've gotten the administration to look into some of these conspiracy theories. They claim that they're feeding them information to the administration. And, we saw in the Fulton County search warrant, they named, one of these election deniers from 2020, or cited in that warrant.
Clay Peruk, who I just mentioned, was one of them. I believe another one named Kevin Monklow was another one.
So it's kind of an amorphous network that's just kind of sitting around waiting to be activated. Makes me feel like, at some date in the future, we don't know when, we're going to be glad we did this episode. Just to have gotten some of this stuff out, because all of a sudden it gets activated. It feels like there are these things in MAGA, these contingency networks that exist for different reasons. Like if you think about the kind of foot soldiers that were activated on January 6th, for example, like people do different roles in MAGA, but like stand back, stand by, whatever thing with the Proud Boys. Trump would at that point realize there's a pretty good chance he was going to lose the election, right? And they sort of like activated this network, and they got Steve Bannon started to hit War Room a lot, and there's a lot of people, filled the space outside the Capitol that day. I mean, it just sort of they activated, and this is I guess a more of a white collar version of that in some ways, like people who are ready to cook the books for Trump or to just throw a bunch of shit in the air and be like, we don't know what's going on, right? Like we can't tell because of all this stuff we just threw up in the air.
Right.
Fascinating that this network is just laying out there, and actually kind of disturbing.
Well, I mentioned Patrick Byrne before. I was just going to mention another group of them that had reportedly, they're kind of big players in the Venezuela conspiracy theory, and they actually have caused administration activity. So Patrick Byrne and another few guys, one I believe is named Gary Bernstein. He's a former CIA official, and a guy named Martin Rodil, who is from a Venezuela expatriate. So they've been like, reportedly had been like feeding a U.S. attorney in Puerto Rico like stuff about like the conspiracy theory that like Dominion was like controlled by Venezuela, through all these different things. And it was partially through that apparently that, I believe at one point like Tulsi Gabbard, when she was the head of DNI, was like looking at Dominion voting machines in Puerto Rico. And it was because reportedly of these people, this group. So, that's just another way like that these people have, influenced the administration.
So with the time we've got left, a question for both of you. As midterms approach and we kind of fasten down the hatches for whatever shit they're going to throw at the wall to try to undermine the results, if they're anything short of a complete red wave, where they obtain all 100 Senate seats and all 435 House seats. As we kind of brace ourselves for that, is there anything on your mind that you're watching for or anxious about? Kayla, I'll start with you. What's on the top of your mind as we enter into these next few months?
The levers to power right now, that particularly concerns me in this potential national emergency. The content creators or independent, quote unquote, journalists that are on the ground trying to ambush or bombard, these election workers. Those two aspects, I think, are particularly concerning for me as we kind of get closer to the midterm. As well as the right-wing media infrastructure that's just ready to amplify all this. Bannon keeps having on Cleta Mitchell and other election deniers and is pushing, all these ideas. So it's something that people have to be aware of going into the election, and that these things are happening behind the scenes. States are the ones that control their election infrastructure, so I think they need to be ready. As we go into the midterms, we're already seeing states file lawsuits for the administration trying to get access to voter rolls, and they've been largely successful. So I think the states are going to be a key player as we get to the midterms.
Alex, what say you?
I think I'm looking to see if, some of the election deniers have started pushing specific dates for when they think Trump is going to declare a national emergency. And now a variation I've started seeing is a pause on the midterms in and of itself. It's sort of like a spinoff, but it's related to the national emergency. So like a pause on the midterms, that Trump could somehow just pause the midterms. Well, we get all sorted out. Steve Bannon, I think, is the claim that it would happen like at the end of the month, at the end of August. Another player who I wanted to mention, because he's given his own theory about when this would happen. It's a QAnon influencer named 107.
Oh yeah, I know this guy.
His claim that it would be at the end of October. It is actually really wild without getting it super into it, but like he's one of the most influential people in this space, and he's not very well known.
I don't know. What's his name? Wano Savage? It sounds like a fucking Star Wars character.
Yeah, his real name is Wayne Willett, and he's become like a real ringleader in this space. Like the conference that a lot of election deniers went to in June that Steve Bannon spoke at, where he called for ICE to go be at the polls, was basically organized by Wano Savin and his chief of staff. Yes, he has a chief of staff.
Hell yeah.
Who's actually the board member of an organization called Fight Voter Fraud.
Jared, we need a new we do need a new character sound on this show. We're overdue for that when somebody enters, when somebody makes an introduction. I love this guy's name. This is like a cantina bar.
Oh,
coded.
it's supposed to mean 107. Like,
oh my God. I'm all right. What, Jared, why didn't you give me the gift of this person already? What does he look like? Is it where he's old, young? Like what? Oh no,
he's like he's an older guy. So people have claimed that he's secretly
that rings true already. Go ahead.
That he's JFK Jr., which he hasn't totally dissuaded people from.
He probably is.
His like thing until maybe more recently would be that when he did interviews, he wouldn't show his face. He would just have the camera away from him. You would just see like his cowboy.
This guy's so cool. Okay.
He was also one of the people involved in crafting the executive order, a national emergency order that reached the Trump administration. So like,
he's a man of respect.
Yeah, this dude has significant influence. And that Secretary of State coalition I mentioned like from a few years ago, when Biden was in office, that was his coalition. Like
either we're going to go totally, we're going to go back to something that resembles a normal world, or and look back and be like, wait a second, this person had access to Trump, and like Jack Posobiec went on like high security priority trips to Ukraine and stuff like that with the administration. This was insane. Or it's just going to go on like this forever. Like the Republican Party is just going to be a bunch of weird, like esoteric characters, like with bizarre names, like obscure, like Marvel encyclopedia names, and like doing stuff like this. It's just it's insane how much access people like this have.
So it's like the EDU,
yes,
instead of the ECU.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we've been talking to Alex Kaplan and Kayla Gogarty from Media Matters. Thanks so much for joining us and talking to us about what's been up with election deniers.
Yeah, thank you. Also for informing everyone. Thank you for informing everyone about these characters who I'm afraid are going to become relevant to people all of a sudden. Remember the Kraken? And everybody was like, oh my God, who is she? Like, what is the Kraken? And then, you were the folks who know. You're hearing first. This is like, like in baseball or something like that with like a bunch of prospects. Like you've got a bunch of guys. All of a sudden, we're going to have to know. What's his name again? This guy? I forgot his name. Is like
Wano Seven,
Lando Calrissian's best friend. 107. You guys remember where you heard it first.
Yeah, it's like all these people spend years creating essentially the lore of the Kraken.
The Kraken, gone but not forgotten. We'll see everyone Thursday.